Mr. Hice is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Administrator Long, thank you so much for being here and for your leadership, what you're bringing to the agency. As we've all seen in recent months, it seems now more than ever, the role that you play is a critical one, and we appreciate the leadership you're providing. I recently, of course, have been impacted by Hurricane Michael. Came through Georgia and through portions of my district were hit hard. We also have family who live in the panhandle of Florida who were directly in the eye of that storm. One family member totally lost their home. Another is severely damaged. They're working through it, and others are surviving and just doing some cases, thankfully, minimal repairs. But in that whole process, I personally went to the panhandle of Florida and obviously some counties in Georgia as well. But because family personally involved, we were on the scene with family, taking supplies and helping generators, that type of thing. And I want to say that the word that I received working directly with people and being right in the middle of that catastrophic event were people who told me that within hours of the storm, FEMA had boots on the ground, doing everything from passing out water to helping clear the roads. And I just want to say personally thank you for the role there. And I'm sure that FEMA was not the only one. I'm sure there was state and local government as well as non-government entities and certainly citizens involved immediately. But I want to thank you for the quick response that FEMA provided there. And with that, of course, Georgia has been powerfully impacted in recent years by a couple of storms. And I, again, want to thank you and your team for working closely with our governor and the incredible work that GEMA does, Georgia Emergency Management Association. But can you walk me through right now what FEMA is doing to work with both Georgia and Florida on Hurricane Michael relief?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to Georgia, I believe we have roughly 69 counties declared for at least public assistance. Not all, I think it's 17 or 18 counties for individual assistance that we're working with. Georgia, what's interesting about expectations is that what Georgia learned is that hurricanes are not just a coastal problem. And the problem with Georgia is more, not only did people, lose their homes and livelihood, but the most tremendous impact in Georgia was one that was agricultural. Right. There were generational losses. You didn't just lose this year's crop, you lost the ability, you lost all your trees that it takes 10 years to regrow to be productive. And so the response and working through Homer Bryson, the director of Georgia Emergency Management Agency, where I started my career, by the way, we are in constant communication, with him and trying to, here again, bring the whole suite of the federal government assistance that comes down to alleviate the comprehensive problem. So it's one thing for us to fix broken infrastructure and try to I think we've put close to $10 million in the hands of Georgians through individual assistance, but then it requires USDA and agriculture to come in to deal with the economic losses that the farmers went through. Florida, what happened in Mexico Beach is something that all of you should go down and see. It's a lesson learned, and I really don't care where people want to live, but there's a risk to live in different places. And if you're going to live along the coast, then you need robust building codes and standards and zone planning. That's the key to reducing the disaster. And Mexico Beach right now is one of these areas where we have to say, how do we do this right if we rebuild Paradise so that we don't go through this again? And Florida was a tremendous hit, and it wasn't just along the coast, it was inland. And it's going to take us years to help Georgia and Florida overcome what Hurricane Michael was.
Yes, the generational loss with the agricultural community is specifically tops on my mind when it relates to Georgia. It is absolutely catastrophic and apocalyptic, really, looking from the panhandle of Florida and areas of Georgia. One other question, just in light of some of the previous discussion that's already taken place relating to Puerto Rico and the reality that FEMA is not first and foremost a first responder. But how do you plan to work differently with state, local, tribal, territorial entities in the future where there are identifiable systemic vulnerabilities? What's the plan to help prepare?
Right.
In the future?
So here again, I go back to the example of the chair. We got to make sure that all 4 of those legs are there. In regards to Puerto Rico, FEMA is now one of the largest employers in the Commonwealth. We've hired, I think we have over 2,400 people there, but I think we've hired 1,800 people locally. We've got the best and brightest in Puerto Rico learning the backbone of emergency management, because what we've got to be able to do is build a robust Puerto Rican emergency management agency at the state level. We're trying to work daily with the 78 municipalities to bolster a capability that was not existent before the storm, and we're making sure that we shore up the capabilities. We've been through multiple exercises. We're rewriting the National Response Framework to incorporate the private sector much better as well, because at the end of the day, FEMA doesn't own most of the infrastructure. We don't own any of it. The private sector owns the infrastructure, so we have to make sure that the private sector is in the front of every bit of our disaster response, that they tell us what they need. Where do they need debris removed so that they can get to their infrastructure? There's a ton of things that are taking place there, but I'm also a believer in outcome-driven recovery. We use what's called Section 428 of the Stafford Act to make sure that every project worksheet, when we rebuild a school system or the hospital system, that it's done in a resilient fashion, that mitigation is put to the forefront of every dollar that we spend, so that we're not doing this again and again and again.
Well, thank you again. There's no perfect agency, but thank you for the work and the leadership you're providing to make this the best it can be in the worst of times, and we appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Hice yields back. Ms. Velazquez.